Hi there. Thanks for checking out the second installment podcast of Struggling to Be Well, the book I wrote about my experiences with mental illness and my journey. I think I'll read a little bit more, continue on where we left off with the part about my complete mental breakdown. So continue off from there. And then I'll read a little bit about my childhood and growing up in Thunder Bay, just to trying to balance it out a little bit so you can kind of get an idea of also what I was going through at a very young age. So we'll start from there, and I'll continue on with the next part of the book. So at this point, I had just gotten back from trying to get across the U.S. border, and I was back at the house with Tina and Burke. And a few days later, I started to get more paranoid and was hearing and seeing things. Things people were saying seemed directed at me, even as they were just passing me by on the street. I remember being so confused at home, I threw one of my drums, breaking my bedroom window. I also let Tina's pet bird go free. So I thought the bird was in some kind of conspiracy, just to give you a little background on that. And I didn't want to hurt the bird, but I wanted to get it out of my sight because I felt intimidated by this bird, believe it or not. And I opened the cage, I took the bird in my hand, and I let it go outside. And it was just a finch, so I doubt if it would have survived the winter. But I felt really bad. Like Tina was very close to that bird, and I felt really terrible about that. I felt bad about the whole thing and blamed it on someone breaking into the house, which of course was not true. My roommates didn't question what I was saying, but years later, I told them the truth. I was running out of money at this time and decided to downsize all my possessions, including my drums, taking a taxi with all my equipment up Yonge Street to a drum shop. I ended up getting about $500 in the form of a check, but I also needed some cash as I didn't have any money to pay for the cab. So I was just winging it, trying to get some money, and even went up there just thinking that hopefully I'd get some cash to pay the taxi cab. So luckily the drum shop obliged and covered my taxi cost. One night I was watching my TV and was hearing things on there that I thought were directed at me. I picked up the TV while it was on and smashed it on the floor, completely breaking it. Later that night I was hearing people screaming my name on the street while I was trying to sleep, and I saw a scorpion on the floor in front of my room, which went and hid under a chair. It looked so real, but even with the fear, the exhaustion took over. I just lay down to rest. So the screaming on the street, it was a shrieking, kind of very shrill, yelling my name, screaming it over and over again. And then I was also hearing very loud footsteps walk up and down the street for hours. So of course I wasn't sleeping, and I was very scared, and I didn't know what was going on with myself and my life at this point. After not sleeping at all for days, one day I noticed there were many butterflies around the bush in front of our house, and they looked so beautiful. The next day there were many bees in that same spot when I went outside, so I started clapping my hands with the bees, killing them all, oddly enough not getting stung once. I had enough and walked out the door that day, never going back, ending up on the streets. I was so disappointed years later when I realized the people I was living with at the time did not even make an attempt to find me or find out what happened after I disappeared from the house one day, leaving all my belongings there. Thinking back to that time, I'm pretty sure I was probably scaring everybody with my unpredictability. Tina did have my parents' phone number, but never called them and didn't send my personal things, including a pine bed, cassette tapes of bands, and band photos and memorabilia. And apparently, she gave my belongings to the actual owner of that house, who did hang on to them for years. But by the time I contacted Tina years later, and she said, "Oh, you just missed him by 6 months. He just threw that stuff out." One night on the street, not having eaten anything for a long period of time or drinking hardly any water, my body was feeling numb. I was pinching myself, and I couldn't feel anything. As I walked by a brick building, I hit as hard as I could with my fist to see if I would feel anything. I didn't. Nothing. A little while later, I felt an energy in my legs, and I started to run down the street so fast that I was almost falling forward. I ran by some guy on the street who yelled "fuck off" at me, and it was a very strange kind of feeling for me. I just felt this burst of energy after being lethargic for a number of days, not eating. I had no energy. I was basically just shuffling down the street, and I just got this burst of energy all of a sudden. So I booted it down the street, and I was running so fast. I walked the street for several days, many weeks, maybe weeks. I have no idea how long it was because I had no idea of a timeline at this point. I remember one day outside of City Hall running around laughing and tried to give passerbys a $20 bill. Finally, a young teenage girl took it, causing me to run away hysterically laughing, thinking that my job was done. I somehow ended up camping out in the streets of Much Music on Queen Street downtown. When I first got there, I was overcome with emotion about what was going on with my mind and got down on my hands and knees and was sobbing uncontrollably. A passerby came by and put his arm over my back and said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I can't remember what I said, but I was very touched by this act of kindness. I stayed in front of the building for 2 or 3 days, chain smoking, and at one point somebody from Much Music came out and told me they didn't mind me staying there, but just to keep the area clean of cigarette butts and not make a mess. A passerby came by a little bit later that evening and said, "Give into it." I said to him, "I'm nothing," feeling that I wasn't even worthy of life. And he said, "You should have a higher opinion of yourself." One night the police came by and I was under my blanket, too afraid to look out. They were grabbing at the blanket, trying to see who was under it, and were kicking at my shins with their hard boots, which really did hurt. They told me to move on, so I did. Walking around downtown another day, I saw 3 jet planes scream past. In my mind, thinking they were angels, not airplanes. I now realize it was around the time of the Canadian National Exhibition, and they were probably from the air show. But at the time, everything was mixed up to me. It's the smallest of things that were going on was part of a conspiracy. Any little movement of something that went by, it would go into my head that was basically something against me. So I was very, very scared at this point. Around the same time, I also remember going into a variety show and asking the owner if I could eat some green beans that he had outside by the front display that had spilled out to the ground. He said, of course, and I picked them up, eating a small handful. Later, I walked to a park and lay on the ground thinking I could hear a water pump pumping under me. And it was like a real sound. I heard a water pump, and somebody would say, did it sound real to you? It absolutely sounded real. But it was like water that was pumping directly under where I was lying on the grass. Very strange. So my whole world had been flipped upside down, and I didn't understand what was happening to me. My new reality did not make any sense to me. I remember trying to get warm one time during the day and sitting inside the doorway of a building, security coming and kicking me out. It was a terrible feeling. That and so many other ways where I was treated badly as a homeless person has made me gentler and have more empathy toward people that are homeless and those suffering from mental illness. At first, when I left the house, I had a winter jacket on, but after a few days, I didn't trust it as it smelled strange to me, and I left it on a street corner. So going back to the first podcast as well, I was getting strange smell and taste hallucinations. So things were, I remember I had a Bible, and the Bible smelled funny to me. Everything had a very odd, unique smell to that particular item, but odd smells that you would not normally smell in society. I couldn't say it smelled like this or smelled like that. These were smells like I'd never smelled before. I had a little bit of money left, so after a few chilly nights, I bought a blanket. It was now fall and was quite chilly in Toronto at night. So that's just basically explaining about how I got the blanket, because of the chilly nights. Having enough of being out of doors on cold nights, I ended up in a hostel downtown, and when I first arrived, I was warned by another homeless person to keep my runners under my pillow at night so no one could steal them. That night, there was a guy in a bed next to me that had gotten up to do something in the next room, and I saw he had a big bag by his bed, and in my mind, I thought there might be something magical in the bag that I needed for the mission that I figured I was on. I wasn't sure what it was, but I needed to get into that bag. I carefully started looking through it. There was a peanut butter sandwich in there as well as a bunch of other things. He returned and saw what I was doing and, of course, was quite upset with me. Staff moved me to another room away from him. The next night I tried to get into the same hostel, but they turned me away, most likely for going through the guy's possessions. Many negative thoughts about dying and getting murdered were going around in my head during this time frame. At first, late one night, I walked along the Highway 401 in Toronto with lanes of 18-wheelers and many other types of vehicles screaming fast by me. This is in the middle of the night, completely pitch black outside on a major highway in Toronto Thoroughway, and with just vehicles screaming right by me. And I don't think I was really scared at that point. It was just kind of, I had a numb feeling inside, and I was just wandering around aimlessly, basically getting turned around to different things, seeing maybe a street sign that said something pointed one way, and that would make me go that way. And I was reading a map, and the map, things that the map had on the map itself, different things that it said, would make me think that I should be doing this or doing that. So any little thing was changing my mind about where I should be or what I should be doing. I had no sense of direction, really. It was very odd. It was very dangerous, although at the time I didn't feel any danger. To try and calm my thoughts, a few days later or so, I started walking west from downtown all the way to Oakville, about 24 miles. It took hours and hours, basically the whole day and night. On the way, when I got to Mississauga, I noticed the sidewalks had little dried berries in many varieties all over, with not a tree or bush in sight. At one point on my way, I went to a farm where they were selling fruit and vegetables and asked if I could have something to eat. They just said no. So very hungry, I continued on. Once I got to Oakville, I decided to start making my way back to Toronto, but was so tired that what I really needed was rest. It was dark and in the wee hours, so I laid down on the sidewalk of all places because I thought it was safer, and say rather than going in the bush or something. What seemed like a few minutes after lying there, I heard sirens and saw lights flashing. Someone had called an ambulance thinking that I was hurt or had died right on the sidewalk. The police arrived. They took my ID, looked at it, and told me to go back to Toronto since it was another division, and the other division would have to deal with me. I remember on my way back that day, just walking and walking and walking, still in bare feet, and finding side roads to walk on and down and not knowing where I was going, just getting turned around every single time, thinking that I should be here or I should be there, and not having any sense of direction. Continuing on my way back to Toronto, I arrived back in Mississauga during the night, and I looked on the opposite side of the street, and much to my amazement, I saw the silhouettes of many pyramids. I had no idea where I was anymore. It started pouring rain, and I was soaked to the skin and so cold that I asked at a restaurant if I could come in, rest, and get dry, to which they agreed. They were very kind. I was about to leave at one point, and the owner said, "Just stay for a while longer. Take it easy." Once again, I was very touched by that act of kindness. I'm sure by looking at my unshaven face and wild, uncombed hair, he knew I was in trouble mentally. Later, I walked by a little factory which was making pita bread, and there was a door open off the street, and I looked in and asked the person who looked like he might be the owner if I could have a pita, as I was very hungry. Obviously irritated, he asked me, "Why should I do that for you? Nobody's ever done anything for me." That made me feel like the lowest of the low. But he gave me a pita anyway, which I ended up not eating as I was afraid of it, and it was smelling funny to me. So I'll read just a little bit more, and then I'll continue on with a little bit about childhood as well. So I'll read to the end of this section here. I went into a grocery store and asked the owner if there was anything I could do to make some money so I'd be able to buy a little bit of food to eat. He said they had no job for me, but took me to the back room where there was a little bushel basket of apples, and he gave it to me. When I got back on the street, I ate one or two of the apples, which were Macintosh. They tasted so very sweet, and I couldn't eat any more, leaving the rest by the side of the road. I didn't like them apples. I kept walking, finally making my way to the outer west end of Toronto. I've never told employers about my illness, as I've always assumed they wouldn't take a chance on hiring me, so in the past I would always alter my work history slightly when applying to account for the lost years in hospital and healing. And any of the people I have worked for after I had become well, will tell you that I am a conscientious and reliable worker, on time, and always and always work hard. I've never had any complaints from bosses or anyone. So I'll leave it at that for now. So that's page 167 of the book. Basically, almost finished that page. And then I can continue on in podcast number 3 with a little bit more from the this section of the book. Now I'll read a little bit about my childhood, and then I'll end off maybe with a few words or something at the very end of the video. Thank you. So I'll just read a little bit of a section called Spaghetti and Soup, page 28 in the book. Basically a little bit of history from my youth and childhood. Bev and I had times in our lives that we would be at odds with each other. At meal times when we were kids, I would make a point during an argument and rub it in, making the point over and over till she'd had enough, and boom, I'd have either a plate of spaghetti in my lap or a bowl of soup over my head, depending upon which was on the menu that day. I would just sit there briefly afterwards, shocked, but cleaned the mess up before my parents saw it. I should have known it was coming. It happened so many times until I got smart and kept my big mouth shut. Bev has quite a few lifelong friends, and when we were very young, she and one friend with whom she is still very close loved animals so much they called themselves the Animal Queens. They would spend many a day playing in the forest singing, "We love animals, 1, 2, 3, a sweet little song they made up. And were very creative, making up their own words in a language, like Trunto, Daniken, and Dunabug. I still remember those words. It's a funny thing, something that sticks with you even after so many years, and you never forget something. And those were the exact words that they had made up. They may have made up more too, but those are the 3 I remember. Bev continues to be very creative, writing daily journal entries. Many fun-filled but hard-working summers were spent at my grandparents' farm. I have an uncle, Ed, that is only 2 years older than me, so we were childhood friends. I would go over there for a few weeks at a time during the summer, but it wasn't all fun and games. We had to work as we got older, which I found challenging, but really didn't mind at all. We'd get up in the morning at a reasonable hour and would help Grandpa in the fields or packing produce in the dugout under the house. There was no basement. It wasn't very hard work, mostly picking vegetables in the fields or weeding, but the reward was after supper we could go tubing at the creek or whatever else we wanted to do. Tubing down the small rapids of the shallow, waist-deep creek was a great joy in that time of my life. The only downside was that when we got to the pool of water at the end, we'd have to get out before the bloodsuckers attached themselves. If there were any on us, a dash of salt would remove them. When we were younger, before we had to work, in the afternoon, Grandma would make cold tea in a mason jar for us to bring to Grandpa, who was working in the hot sun in the fields. He was always so grateful, taking huge swigs of the wet, refreshing tea. Ed and I had no shortage of games to play. On the farm, there were lots of little nooks and crannies to play in. We were great friends during those years, with Ed teaching me all of the berries and nuts on the property that were safe to eat, and even how to spot wild chamomile to make tea. On Sundays, we would wake up to the smell of bacon cooking and head to the Christian Reformed Church for about 10 a.m. The minister was always very entertaining in his sermon, with his hands flailing around like he was going to fly off the pulpit. It was like I wanted to look away, but my eyes kept drifting back to watch him again. With Grandpa being very religious, we couldn't work at all on Sunday, not even fix a bike tire. Sunday evenings, we had to endure the Dutch language service at the church. But the peppermints and other candies Grandma would give us for both services would help immensely and make things more interesting. Thankfully, the Dutch service was only about an hour. We hardly understood a word as we only spoke English at home. So I'll read one little other section and then I'll finish off for today. Thank you for watching. If you've continued to watch this, I really appreciate it. And I hope you're enjoying the story so far. When I was between the ages of 10 and 12, Mom would take me to a couple of the bingo halls that would let underage kids play. We'd always get there so early that the person responsible for opening up the hall would arrive after us. I always thought that was funny. Bingo was serious business. 1 second here. There we go. Bingo was serious business to these ladies. And they all brought their favorite little Lucky Charms, which they would line up on the table like little soldiers in front of their cards. One bingo night was always held at a Roman Catholic church in the basement that was located way out on a lonely country road. There were always a couple friendly games of cards at our table with several of the ladies before the bingo proceedings. The thick cigarette smoke would fill the hall packed with about 100 ladies and me, so bad that my eyes would be burning, and the only way I could get relief was to put my head under the table. Mom would nervously watch my cards and hers, shouting, "Bingo!" even before I had a chance to realize that I had won. I have always thought of myself as lucky, so when I would win a jackpot, Mom would share the winnings with all of the family. And this was rightly so, as she paid for all the bingo cards. So I'll end there. It goes into when I was about 12 years old. After that, there is more preceding that in the book too, starting at a very young age, family history as well. More about the other members of the family, and just about my journey. This was pretty light reading, the stuff I just read right now, but it does get into more serious topics as well, dealing with my mental illness even at a young age. And I just want to reach out to anybody who's watching this that is struggling now from mental illness. Know you are loved. And don't let anybody tell you that you're not a good person. And it's not your fault. And always try and be a better person, and just don't worry about what other people think, because that's not important. It's important how you feel inside. I want to thank everybody for watching this, and I hope you will watch the third podcast. And have a great day. Sorry for getting emotional, but it's something very dear to my heart. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.